All right. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's high performance coaching webinar. My name is Grania O'Neill. I'm National Coordinator for the Women in Tennis programme here at Tennis Ireland. I'm delighted and really excited to be joined by our guest speaker today, Sarah Stone. So before I fully introduce Sarah, I just want to very quickly take you through a tiny bit of housekeeping. So as you can see here, today's webinar is being recorded. We will place that recording up on YouTube on our Tennis Ireland channel in the coming few days. So for anyone who doesn't make it, you can let them know that recording will be available. At the very bottom of the screen, I'm sure you're all aware at this stage, but there's a Q&A box. So we encourage any questions throughout. Please feel free to pop them in there. We'll allocate some time at the latter end of the webinar to go through those. There's also a chat function as well, so we encourage any comments. So my premise really behind today's webinar is to just give a chance, when we've done previous webinars, I usually tend to do exit surveys, and high performance coaching was one strand that came up and was requested by attendees. So I'm really excited for Sarah, and I couldn't think of anyone more suited to speak about high performance coaching than Sarah. So Sarah is an Australian native. She's tuning in from Melbourne right now. She's a former professional tennis player. She's coached on the WTA tour for over 10 years as a professional tennis coach, and she actually coached Sam Stosur. So Sam was a 3-time Grand Slam champion under her tutelage. She's also the CEO of the Women's Tennis Coaching Association. So the aim of that association is to provide a support base for coaches for female tennis players. So I'm really excited for her to chat through her experience, and hopefully you'll gain some valuable insight from today's session. So I do also want to say thanks to her, because I know the time difference with Irish and Melbourne time, and I also want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in a bit of an earlier time than usual. So thanks to both of you. So without further ado, we'll get straight into it, Sarah, if you're good to go.
Ready, Grania. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all the coaches for getting up early. That's almost my wake up time on the daily since I'm in lockdown. So good on you for getting on board.
No, brilliant. So Sarah, you might just talk us through a little bit about your experience, maybe your pathway to coaching and how you started and progressed.
My path to coaching is probably a little bit different than most people's. My dad's a tennis coach. I grew up around tennis. When I was about 4 years old, my dad coached a player by the name of Barbara Potter. She was an American player, number 7 in the world. And from as long as I can remember, she was here and practicing with my dad, and I would run along to the Australian Open with a little credential and probably run amok from 5 years old. And I was always around tennis at the club. It's a big club where I grew up. Margaret Court played at that club, Pat Cash, loads of champions, Frank Sedgman. And I started coaching for my dad actually when I was about 14, because that's when he had let me just help out with some little kids. I started learning how to string rackets and make my own business when I was 7. So tennis has really been my life, and I coached pretty much right through, here and there when I was playing. And when I got injured, I was playing doubles with Sam Stosur at the time, and I had a pretty bad foot injury, and I took a protective ranking from the WTA tour. And in that time, I wasn't working with Sam at all before that, but I knew a game pretty well, and having my dad as a coach and a mentor is somebody I really didn't like listening to, but subconsciously I was absorbing a lot of information. It was extremely difficult for me to have a parent as a coach, especially one who was as knowledgeable as he is, and then not be able to listen to that, because it was like that all the time. And was one of the reasons why when I was injured, I just didn't have enough passion to go back in the game. So I stopped playing and just started working with Sam, and that went along pretty well. She had a lot of success. There were a couple of different coaches that came here and there and worked with us. I was fortunate enough to learn quite a lot from one of her doubles partners, Lisa Raymond, and Gigi Fernandez was part of the coaching team for a little period of time. And once you're on the pro tour, you're kind of on the tour, and that's how it works. If there's coaches watching that would like to get into the pro level of coaching, it's just basically you first got to get your foot in the door. And how you do that, there's many different ways of getting your foot in the door. My way of moving straight into pro coaching is I was playing doubles on the pro tour, and I was also playing with someone who was really good. So that's not going to happen for everybody. Other coaches, the way it typically works is that you either go from being a professional, or if you haven't played professionally, through an academy. You can get involved in some bigger academies, and that's where a lot of pros come through, and they might get to know you a little bit as a hitting partner, and then they actually have exposure. Because the problem, there's lots of really great coaches in the world that professional players have absolutely no idea who they are. And even this, I've had this conversation with a few friends. They've coached players on tour, but people don't know who the coach is by name. So you can't just assume that the players are going to know who you are just because you're around. You really have to build relationships. One of the ways a lot of male coaches get onto the tour is they start as hitting partners. And that can become, then you graduate almost. For female coaches, it's quite a lot different, and it is more difficult. It's unusual at the moment for any female coaches to coach on the pro tour who haven't played professionally. But that's something that together we're gonna do a lot to change. There are there's only a handful of female coaches actually working on the professional tour. There are a couple of coaches who play college tennis, and then they went the way of working up the ranks through their federation. I think there's a path for everybody. It just depends. You have to get some pretty good guidance as to which way you're going to navigate that. And you definitely have to be open to asking a lot of questions from other people who know how to help you get to where you've got to get to. Nobody's going to get there alone. It doesn't matter if you play doubles with Sam Stosur. It's just, for me, yes, it was very lucky. But had I not have had my dad beat that knowledge into my brain, I wouldn't have been able to be prepared for that moment that came along. And coaches need to spend as much time as they can doing webinars like this, expanding their knowledge and just continuing to grow as coaches. And that's what I did. From Sam, I worked with another player from Italy, and then I knew a lot of players on the tour that from playing, but also from coaching. And so it's sort of step by step by step. I've gone back and forth from coaching on tour. I went back to private coaching, director of clubs, coaching with high performance juniors. And then I never thought I'd go back to coaching on the pro tour, but how it happened was I was hitting with one of my friends that I'd worked with previously, and she was the practice partner of Alexa Glatch, who I now have coached for over 8 years. And Alexa didn't have anyone to hit with. And I was pretty bored at work. I started working at 3:30 in the afternoon each day. I worked for a very well-to-do family in America, and 3:30 was when the kids got out of school. And I said to Alexa, hey, I'm around. If you don't have that many people to hit with, I'm happy to jump on the court and get out there. I really don't have anything to do during the day. And that's how our relationship started. It wasn't Alexa looking to me to say, I want you to be my coach. We hit some balls, and I said to her, if I see anything, do you want me to say anything? Because I don't know what, her coaching situation. And she said, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And we got along well, had a few hits. And I said, look, I've got some junior squads. I know you don't have a lot of hits. Why don't you come along and hit some balls with the kids? And that's the way we built the relationship. And then over time that became, and she didn't pay me for any of that. We had some hits. She joined the groups for free. That was a benefit to me. And then once we kind of established that relationship and she liked what I had to say, then we started talking about what that would look like for me to coach her. And this is typically how it works. You can't just think that you're just going to roll straight in. It's all about establishing relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned a little bit about your father's involvement. Would you have considered him, I know you obviously have kind of alluded to the fact you might have had a bit of a strained relationships at times, but would you have considered him a mentor, and do you think he would have advocated for you to be kind of involved in the coaching side of tennis? Or was it always, you only saw yourself as a player and you just kind of fell into the coaching side of things?
That's a great question. I never really planned anything. I've never really planned anything in my life. It's not that I just go along, but I think I have interests, and obviously I was interested in tennis. I love the social aspect of tennis. I personally didn't love playing that much. I think it's very hard to have a parent. I knew that he knew a lot, but I did not enjoy being on the court with him at all. It was very sporadically. Some of the moments I remember were fun, but for the most part, it was quite difficult. And nowadays, he asks me to go out and look at his players and help him. So it's quite interesting. But the way coaching kind of progressed for me is I liked certain aspects of the sport, and I just always stay open to opportunities. When I started the WTCA, it was born out of just genuine curiosity as to what can I contribute to tennis to help more girls stay in the game, because I knew from my dad that girls start dropping out of tennis 10 to 12. And I actually read a stat the other day that I believe it was from Mike Barrell, who's across the pond for you guys, that by the time kids have played, I believe 3 or 4 tournaments, 75% of them don't play any more tournaments. And maybe even after the first tournament, 50% don't play anymore. And they're crazy stats. And I knew that I had a pretty extensive network in the women's space, and I wanted to contribute, but I never knew that it would become what it would become. So for coaches, you have to have some sort of idea as to what you might be interested in. You might be interested in one day coaching professionally. You might be interested in doing some of the ITF juniors. You don't have to be absolutely specific that I want to coach a player that wins a Grand Slam, but you have to have a curiosity about how you can expand as a coach and surround yourself, build contacts, reach out to people. Most people will say yes. Most people want to help you. They might not be able to do absolutely everything for you, but literally anyone that I've ever asked what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And there are people that I'm not used to asking things to, but the only way you're going to find out is if you ask them. So just get a general idea. If you have those aspirations, talk to your federation or reach out to people. Everything's online, and someone will help you on your path.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually really interesting you say about surrounding yourself with like-minded people, because we had Judy Murray on a webinar previously, and she really advocated for that. And she said, look, I always am interested to be involved in anything that supports women in tennis, because when I started out, I didn't have that support, and I kind of had to do it by myself. And I think another strand sometimes that coaches might struggle with or find difficult is perhaps clubs don't want to implement any kind of high performance strategy within their overall goal or aim as their local club. So do you have any kind of advice you would give to those coaches who are just looking to implement maybe a performance squad or anything like that within their club, and how they would go about getting the support from their club committee?
It's difficult because your club committees work a lot like they do where I'm from. I'm from Melbourne in Victoria, and they're all committee run clubs, and you can't really compare that to the United States or other areas of Australia, because typically the coach or the management team rents the facility and you have full access to do whatever you want. And also at those academies, they have 20, 30 courts. And a lot of the clubs that we're dealing with, my dad's club has 7 courts. I have friends with 3 to 5 courts. And performance doesn't bring any revenue. And that's one of the most difficult things. I would say that you sort of have to build your case. Look for players that can be ambassadors for your club, and also look for the players that you want to work with. There has to be some sort of give and take, that they've got to be part of the club, because why people are at a club is because of the connection with people. It's a club. They want to be together. And if you've got high performance juniors that just want to swing in and swing out and just monopolize the court time, it's not very inviting to the club, and they don't get anything out of it. So when you're pitching your clubs on these things, make sure that you share those kinds of things, that it's a win-win for them and for you. I think be strategic about your court time. Utilize some strength and conditioning or footwork or something so that you can expand your numbers, because in that high performance space, you can't really get 6 kids on a court. I mean, you can, but it just depends how good they are. Up to a certain standard, you can get 6 and sometimes 8 kids on a court, and that's where the numbers really make sense for the club. And it's also really dependent on what your contract is with your club. Do you take all the revenue out of the lessons, or is there a split with the club? If there's a split with the club, obviously that's a whole different ball game because they get a say sort of in what happens. I would just be really mindful of the parents and build good relationships with the parents and the kids and make sure that it's really a community-based thing. And it's not that easy, but you just got to work and build relationships. And then when you build relationships, you get a lot more things over the line. Sometimes you're going to have to do some early morning sessions if you want the two kids to a court, or you might have to go quite late. I know in America, they had some stuff where it was 7 to 9 that kids would come and do match play. And I'm not advocating for that. I think it's quite late. And I also think a lot of kids don't do that well if they don't get enough sleep. So the 6 o'clock sessions or 7 a.m. sessions can be pretty tough.
Yeah.
But just work with the team. Don't try and ostracize your committees because before you know it, you'll be out the door.
Yeah, another thing we're trying to implement, so we have a performance squad within NACE in my own local club, and we're trying to implement kind of more of a junior senior integration. So whether that be, formal competition between junior members, so like 14, 15, 16 against obviously the adults, or just some kind of facilitating a training session where you're integrating maybe like lower level league teams and having them train or do a session together with the high performance. So that way, because I think in a lot of clubs, you see the same faces every day, but you don't get the opportunity to actually speak face to face and introduce yourself. So that could be another strand that maybe if clubs are kind of a little bit iffy about the whole high performance, that you get them integrating with all the members and all the club members and get that kind of camaraderie and friendship, as opposed to the standoff nature of, okay, are they going to take away our court time or whatever it may be.
No, that's absolutely true. I played club matches in Holland, and that's the way that we did it. It was some of the younger players. It was like a time that you did the team practice, and that was the adults with the juniors quite integrated, and that made for such great club spirit, much better than what we have in Australia. It's some of those European countries do really, really well with that. And I don't think that it's done extremely well because club tennis is not really huge here or in Ireland or in England. So I would say if you can integrate that practice, it's a great suggestion.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the WTCA. So you might even just explain kind of the reasoning behind wanting to do it and what you do with the WTCA, because it's fantastic. Like I follow your social media pages, and you're providing really, really good content for coaches, and I'd really recommend any of the coaches on the line if they don't follow WTCA too, because it's really useful content. And I regularly look back and reference some of the stuff and the drills that you share, because I think it's fantastic.
It didn't start for that purpose, and it's sort of become an evolving purpose. The reason that the WTCA came together, one of my best friends is also, she's one of the top coaches at Tennis Australia. At the time, she wasn't working on tour, but I spent some time with her, and I said, when I look around, there's just no female coaches. And I said, we're both pretty social. I said, we need to do something about that. She said, yeah, that's a good idea. And it started with, I felt like women's tennis just wasn't visible. When I would go online, I would see, how do you hit your forehand like Rafa? How do you serve like Roger? How do you hit your backhand like Novak? These kinds of things. And it's just on repeat, the same, but that's not realistic. If you're talking to a 5'4" female player about how to move efficiently, there's no point using Novak Djokovic's 2-step across the baseline as an example. You just can't cover the same amount of space. But that's just from a physiological standpoint. The other side is that you want your young female players to be inspired by female role models, because that's who they could become. They can't become Novak Djokovic. And you've got great female role models out there. And it was always the go-to. It's because you go to whatever's in your face all the time. If you keep seeing that, that's what you regurgitate. Yeah. So we started a platform where it was a twofold thing. One was, I felt like if we had the support of great male coaches who are advocates for women and women's tennis, then we would create an environment where female coaches could feel comfortable, thrive, get opportunities because they felt supported. We started with Facebook because everything's Facebook, and it just kind of evolved from trial and error. And it's the same things that we've spoken about. What was the need? What did the market sort of ask for? People have really liked drills. I liked seeing female players performing really athletically in drills and show that your female athletes are highly capable of doing X, Y, Z. And sometimes there's players that can't do those things. And I think you need to showcase all standards, all diverse backgrounds and everything like that. Everybody needs a seat at the table, and everyone needs to see somebody that looks like them. So that was the way that the it kind of grew from there. It started as that, and we incorporated as a nonprofit. And the reason that I felt like it was most important to be a nonprofit is that even though I founded the WTCA, I feel like it belongs to everybody in tennis. And this, it most certainly is not mine. And that has been the biggest thing, why we've been able to have quite a lot of success and get a lot of the Billie Jean Kings, and we have Patrick Motoroglu coming up. I don't know, Lindsay Davenport, Renee Stubbs, Justine Henin. I mean, it's just really some great people, is that they buy into that sense of doing something together in community. And if the best thing that you guys can do over there is work together with your coaches from down the road, far down the road, and unite, because together you can accomplish a lot. And as individuals worrying about who's going to steal that player or who's going to look like the better coach, nobody goes anywhere. So it's been super collaborative. We've managed to work with some great organizations. The PTR was really supportive for us for the first 3 years, and strategically for us in the American space, we have now partnered with the USPTA, and that's a great partnership. And it's all about working together, and it's done pretty well because around the world, it's ignited change. I think Judy Murray is an incredible person and done wonderful things. She laid the foundations for us just to be able to move along down the road. There was a lot of people that came before, and it's just nice that there's more people in that space, but like yourself and all the coaches that have tuned in.
Yeah, absolutely. A big thing in my role is to advocate for female role models, and we partner up with an initiative called 20 by 20. So their slogan is, if she can't see it, she can't be it, which I think really resonates with what you're talking about. Like, if we don't have those female coaches at the highest capital positions, like, no one will aspire, no one will see that happening and want to aspire to be that. So that's a really,
that's
really
from
good
Billie
point.
Jean King. I mean, that's her saying, you know. And for the male coaches, you're just going to create so many more opportunities for your business, because there aren't a lot of female coaches. And if there are female coaches that aren't quite where you need them to be, I've had coaches I had one coach shadow me in America recently for 3 months, and now she has the confidence to go and do everything, and she didn't. And women won't be forthcoming because of that fear of being inadequate and not up to what you'll need. Mentor them, have them watch your lessons, and you'll have a much more expansive program if you can bring female coaches into what you're doing. It'll just be a game changer. So I really encourage the male coaches to do that, and know that female coaches will not reach out to you asking you to mentor them. It doesn't work that way. If you see someone and you see something in them and you believe they could be a great asset to your program, let them know and say, I'd love you to be part of it. Do you want to come and spend some time? I'd love to help you get to where you want to get to. And then you'll get female coaches. They're not going to put up their hand very often. Yeah, absolutely.
I want to take it back to some of your highlights with your coaching career. Do you have any specific ones that stand out? Because I know obviously with tennis, there's a lot of highs and lows when it comes to playing, coaching, do whatever it may be. But what's kind of one standout highlight, if you could pick one, from your coaching career?
You know, I really can tell you the one that for me that has filled me up the most as a human being was a recent one, a 13-year-old girl, I got asked to help out with the high performance program. And I go twice a week to join in this program. And this kid I had about 10 girls, and this kid just wouldn't talk to me. I'd ask her, so how are you feeling? What have you been up to? And she would literally not speak to me. She was so shy. And I thought, this kid, I mean, she's just rude. And I didn't treat her like that, but that's what I thought. And I just kept trying. And anyway, I moved my facility about 3 months after. I spent 3 months with this kid, and a couple of the kids came over to where I was, and her dad had called up and asked if she could be part of it. And I thought, oh, well, yeah, why not? It's fine for me, whoever can join the program. And then I found out that she was so afraid of that coach that was the manager of that center, that she couldn't speak to me, and she was so worried she was going to get in trouble. But she was really shy, and her dad said to me, oh, is there anything you can do? Can you get her to talk? Because she's so quiet. And I said to her dad, look, the only thing I can do is just keep being really positive with her, encourage her, create a safe space for her to communicate when she's ready. And that's my job, and we'll see what happens. And she became really the most talkative kid in my group. And her dad said to me, you can't believe how much she talks at home now. She never shuts up. So on a personal note, for me, they're the things that I really enjoy as a coach, and that is professional. But in the professional tour space, I can't divide them. One was when Sam and Lisa won the US Open, when they had won that match, and Sam walked over to the box, and it was she looked up to the box, and it was this look of like, we did it as a team, and she'd won a mixed Grand Slam, but as much as mixed Grand Slams are Grand Slam titles, in the professional world, they're not really looked at quite the same. If you win a doubles Grand Slam over a mix, it's a big difference. And, I'd take any Grand Slam, but she walked over and she was so happy. And that was a really amazing moment. The other one was when Alexa, who I coach now, she's had so many injuries. They thought she was going to be a 10-time Grand Slam champion when she was 15. Like, she was just an amazing player, and due to injuries and setbacks, she's really had a rough time. And she qualified at the French Open in 2015. And just because she'd been out for 2 years before that was amazing. And the other one was when 2 years ago, Alex Krunic won St. Hergenbosch. She won a single WTA singles title. And for me, that was something that was really cool, because Alex just doubted herself a lot, and we were able to talk her over the line. Alexa and I took the coaching, we shared it that week. And it was just a really great moment, because I was older in my coaching journey, and I think I had a lot more appreciation. When Sam won 3 Grand Slams, I just thought that's what happened. Yeah. You win Grand Slams. I really didn't at the moment. It was just part of the ride, and I really enjoyed those times, but I didn't really realize that this is extraordinary. I look at it now that it was extraordinary, but at the time I just thought that's what happens. And every player ever since, wow, they would give anything to do that. And it's kind of crazy. So they're 4, but I have to say them all.
They're pretty good highlights. We have actually a question submitted prior to the start of the webinar, and it's actually from our coach developer here, Maurice, who's fantastic. And I'm just going to read it out because I don't want to incorrectly call it out. So her question was, looking at the serves on the women's tour, it seems that the majority will use the foot up, aka the step up stance, rather than the platform. If this is correct, what's your opinion on this, or do you have any thoughts on the foot up rather than the platform stance for serve?
Maurice, very interesting question for when you get to watch this back. Hello, everyone. Maurice was a fantastic tennis player, and she's an incredible person. Tennis Ireland is super lucky to have someone like her on board. It was, a lot of step ups. I think there's a lot of step ups because traditionally coaches have taught the step up, and that's sort of, some people get really stuck in that. That's what they think serve should look like, and that the platform is just like some modern tennis fad, I guess. And maybe that's the perception. I'm not exactly sure. I do think that the platform serve can be quite helpful for coaches because it's biomechanically, like, it's difficult. The serve is a difficult motion to coordinate. If you have any breaks in the kinetic chain, then the whole serve goes off. So when you do that platform serve, I think it sort of helps isolate the serve to a more simple motion. Also, perhaps I don't know enough about it, but to do with leg strength, maybe what Maurice is saying, I think it's almost easier in some regards to do a platform serve, but coaches don't want to teach it that much because they have a stylistic preference. For me, I have a step up serve, and I had a really good serve. It's quite an athletic motion to do that. You have to address, does the player have the athletic capacity to produce a good result out of that? Or is it better for them to do a platform serve? And it's also dependent on what works for them. So for example, Alexa Glatch, who I'm working with now, she has a platform serve. Sorry, my monitor went off. She has a platform serve, and her technique is, it's not textbook, but she can serve 125 or whatever, 205 at her fastest. She's had some herniated disc problems because she gets a lot of that power from, a little bit like Wawrinka. It's the only one to compare it to, where they have like a bit of an arc in their back and they snap forward and generate power that way. But we did a step up serve with her, and her step up serve, you would look at it and go, that is textbook perfect how she should serve. But her serve was 25 miles an hour slower because she just couldn't get her body to get that torque to generate the speed by doing the step up. It doesn't matter what it looks like. You kind of need to look at the best result. And this goes to men's tennis. Andy Roddick didn't have a great serve. Andy Roddick and I grew up together. He was small, didn't have a good serve. And Tariq Benabil he's one of the best coaches in the world, a French guy. He just said to him, I want you to do whatever action you can, serve as hard as you can. And that was the result. And obviously Andy then shot up 5 feet, but sometimes you just got to look at the player and go through that. Try the platform, try the step up, see which one works. One of the problems, actually, maybe why Maurice is asking about this, is with the step up serve, people incorrectly load the back leg, and they try to, rather than load the back leg, they try to shift their front hip out into the court, and it's incorrect coaching. Because and I was just writing a textbook about this and watching over, Dr. Mark Kovacs gave a presentation in New York about this. As soon as you tell the person, most players, to shift their front hip out into the court, they shift all their weight to the front hip and the front leg and don't properly load that back leg. And you really need to sit back and for the storing the elastic energy and that coiling, to get the trunk, you need to load that back leg correctly. So I think maybe where Maurice is going with that is, if you did go to the platform, it does help people perhaps load a little bit better, because the step up often becomes a very forward motion and there's absolutely no drive off the back leg, and really struggle to climb up to the serve. And I did do some study and see that from that loading position, when you explode from the back hip, you're driving that hip up, your serve speed is determined by how fast you can drive out of that hip. So throwing is valuable because there's certain mechanics. The preparatory phase of serving is similar to throwing. But when you're actually throwing a ball, your arm comes out from your body rather than when you're serving and it's an upward drive. So definitely get your girls throwing, but have a lot of throwing where they've got to throw straight up. And so it's more of that direction. And it's not to say that throwing's not good. It biomechanics does not mimic the serve. You need to be doing both. But the biggest factor that they found, and there's a lot of studies that Dr. Ben Kipple has done with the WTA, is just that inability to sit back and load. So one of the things that, for me, it was quite easy. I did a lot as a kid. I did a lot of shot put. I did every sport. I did a lot of track, and that back leg, the drive out of that leg and that position is kind of how it goes. They have another thing that they do for serving where you sit the bucket of balls behind the player and they reach back and grab a ball. And then from that position, they push up and launch up and throw the ball. A lot comes to do with the back leg loading. So when they are doing that step up serve, it's very often either no weight goes forward or weight goes forward too quickly. So the platform perhaps helps with the loading. It's really up to just experiment with it and really spend time learning. We talked about this before. Spend a lot of time learning about what is actually going on with the serve. When the racket head, what is the timing between the toss and the step? And for players to realize that they drop into their knees as their racket's coming up, and as their racket's going down, that's when their hips are driving up and their body actually is going up. You can use these things with the players because you can't just expect that all players are going to know the timing. And if they don't have that natural skill or athletic capacity just to kind of feel it, you can give them a few cues about where should the racket be and things like that that'll help them with their serve. So it's a long-winded answer, but I went on a lot about serve.
No, it's really interesting, that whole idea of like power from the ground up. Like if you're not actually fully utilizing that back load leg, you can't expect to generate any power. It'll just all be from the arm. It's interesting you say that as well, actually, because I know even from my own experience, when I was a junior, I always did the step up and I was kind of taught that, but I deviated to the platform kind of ultimately through, like I was getting really inconsistent and my rhythm was always off. So if I was a bit nervous, I was rushing through it quicker. So I was never getting that consistent rhythm. Whereas with the platform, I kind of knew, okay, there's not much going down. It's a solid foundation base. So then I can get that more consistent
you could, and
serve.
then you can kind of figure out where the toss fits in, because there's so many serves are completely out of sync. And historically, people have done serving for step-up servers, making them keep their feet grounded so that they can work on the rotation. So they don't, when a lot of female players will go from this direction, a lot of female players step up and they bring their foot to the side, and they just totally open up their hips and then they just basically fold. And the other thing with what the WTA has spent a lot of time on is that a lot of players, probably because of that, they have a pull through motion. And what they do is they get to this trophy position and then they pull their butt back towards the fence to pull their shoulders through. So this is a pretty simple term that players can understand, that you want them to have a push through motion rather than a pull through. And if they have that concept, it can help them stay a lot straighter rather than just folding at the hips to get their shoulders to come through. So that they're the two things you'll find with female players, that a lot have that pull through motion. All circles back to not loading correctly for that upward drive.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wanted to touch a little bit, and it's an issue I think some coaches face, and that's maybe parental involvement and sometimes the pressure that parents put on kind of elite juniors. Do you have any bits of advice to give to coaches? Because I know even from my own experience, I've been asked this a lot, like how did you find when you were a player, and how much involvement did your parents have? How much support did your parents give? What is there any bits of advice you would give to the coaches on the line this morning, just to talk a little bit through that? And maybe if you are to witness, parents become quite aggressive, or, just a little bit too much involvement, like, is there anything coaches can do from their end, or is that very much it's a player by player scenario?
It can be really hard. It's not with my dad that it was like that, but what was hard with my dad was when I was hearing one thing at home that he would not deliberately but almost undermine what the coach was telling me. And so what you've got to understand at home, even at that level, when my dad realistically should know better, probably knows better now, but you've got parents that don't know anything and they're just saying anything at home, and you just have to know that's a given. You have to expect that, and there's really very little you can do about that. The number one thing is you have to build trusting, open relationships with the parents. Have time for them. I know some of their questions are difficult, but set it up from the start. Be really clear with the boundaries. Nobody needs to be answering their phones unless they absolutely want to after 8 p.m. before 8 a.m. Set some boundaries. You know, if you do it once, you'll do it twice. They'll expect that you're going to do it all the time. And it's very easy. You just have to be clear with people. If you don't want people contacting you on weekends, just be clear with them. And that way everybody knows where they stand, because parents are just going to keep pressing for information.
Yeah.
I would say that there's going to be circumstances that if you really think that there's danger or there's harm or something going on there, you need to probably talk to either you guys, you know, talk to your federation if you suspect abuse or anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of resources where you can reach out. That's something that I haven't had to deal with, but I have asked what's the best way to go forward, and I would always refer to the national body to figure out those next steps, because they have things in place for that. And us as private coaches, it's really tricky. I have known of it. I've a lot, I hate to say it, but I have a lot of friends that have been pretty badly beaten by parents that have played on tour, and some that didn't end up getting to the tours, some that, you know, I'm talking from number one in the world through to whatever else. It's pretty bad. I had a friend, a very good friend, who one year was a great player, was a 16th seed at the Australian Open, and she didn't play well, and she'd had a bad injury, and she lost first round. And we went to the Australian Open Players Party because I had a party. We hung out together, and then I got home that night. It was in the hotel where she and her dad were staying, and I got home that night on my mobile phone and had like 50 missed calls and messages. And I was like, oh yeah, whatever. I was young. And then she told me when she got home that night, and actually he'd been to the party with us. She stayed later than he would like, and he was a boxer. He punched her in the face, and this stuff. I have many friends that have broken noses and burnt irons on their legs and hot irons on their legs. It exists, so just know it exists. Look for those kind of signs. I think that that's not typically what happens. I think what typically happens is there's a lot of pressure from parents. Yeah. The car ride home is very hard for kids. One thing that worked quite well in America with the parents, and I would explain to them, you need to give the kids balance. You know, the worst experience for them is the car ride home. You can say it straight up to them. It's not saying that you're guilty of anything. What parents have done quite well is they actually put on tennis podcasts with the kids on the way home. And so that's kind of like, that's been a good balance for them. Yeah. Forge very open, trusting relationships with your players always, but particularly in this regard, because often they just need someone to tell. Yes. And that lightens the load for them. And you can not normalize it for them, but just say, I understand that this is tough, and your parents have your best interests at heart. And I know sometimes these circumstances can be difficult. Let's just keep the conversation open, and then you're more likely to hear maybe a sense of something if something's really off. But I have banned one parent ever because she was over the line. She was a very high profile athlete, and she was very abusive to her daughter verbally during the lessons, and they would come in crying and fighting, and it was too much for me. And the kid, that was it. She never came back. But I think sometimes you can't just keep sucking it up. There's always going to be another student. Don't be so worried about making money. And I understand we all have to make money. Sometimes if you draw that line in the sand that other coaches aren't going to draw, you're at least showing that that's not okay. And hopefully maybe down the road things will change. It's not easy, but you're trying to walk this tightrope or thin line between they're paying you and their demands. So set your boundaries. I would I'd be cautious about letting coaches on the court. Parents, Tennis Australia has a rule that parents cannot be on the court at all. Parents can't pick up balls. I think if you can establish that in your programs from the outset, that's the best thing you can do. I had a private lesson a little while back, a couple of days, and right now we're in lockdown. And you're not supposed to do X, Y, Z on, this is a high performance player. And I told the parent, it's a rule of the police, you cannot watch. And then she brought the dog. And then I said to her, listen, I don't have a problem with you being around if you continue to walk the dog. You're not allowed to stand there and do that. You just have to be clear with people. And I know it's uncomfortable, but that's the way it goes. And
better to do it from the offset than kind of let it develop and then suddenly it's a bigger issue than it should be.
And they'll be nervous. They won't like the rules, but if you set them there and you ask them about their life and empower them with knowledge, tell them to do the tournament schedule, figure out the logistics, give them jobs, or else they'll create jobs.
Yeah, of course. I know as well from my own experience playing and being coached, I was always appreciative of my coaches if they gave me maybe a brief summary after a win or a loss, and then once I kind of had a couple of days to think about it, then they analysed it further. So even for any coaches on the line, that usually I was always appreciative of that, because I think you're quite emotional whether you win or lose on a tennis court coming off.
Yeah.
So I think being bombarded with information and kind of a breakdown of how you played, sometimes it just almost makes you more upset or just more kind of dismissive of any of the information that's being given. So I think that's probably a good thing to think about as well, that maybe, as a coach, you could jot down a few notes, but maybe not giving it straight away to the player when they're in that kind of emotional, vulnerable.
You have to wait an hour. That's the sports psychologists say it. And there's going to be girls that are going to need it's very emotional. It's very personal. It's different than working with male players. They might not be able to emotionally process any kind of feedback or conversation until the following day. And you just have to respect that. Everyone's individual.
Yeah, that kind of ties into my next question. So as if you're a female coach, do you find there's a difference coaching male players to female players, or do you look at it as a player basis regardless of gender or anything like that? Are you just simply looking, okay, what do they specifically need to work on? Or are you always conscious that there is a difference between coaching female players and male players?
I would say yes. You're always conscious, because the interrelationship between the menstrual cycle and performance is something that coaches need to know about. You can't just put your head in the sand and have no knowledge of how this changes performance, because when girls get their periods, there's a lot of things that can happen due to ligament laxity. Their backs can go out. That's something that happens quite often with WTA players. Their hips go out of alignment. They can throw their back out. This is because of the laxity of ligaments. On the second day of girls' periods, they're losing a lot of blood, and it can be really hard to even get yourself off the ground. And those mood swings of young girls, it's all part of just their hormones leveling out, and it's inconsistent. And that, of course, physiologically we are different than males. So if you don't have an understanding of that, you're not going to be as successful as you could be if you just knew where you can drive. You can't just tell a girl who's feeling bad because they have their period to suck it up. It just doesn't work. And it's just, you have to understand this. And what's different with coaching female players, typically, not all, and I would say from my experience, 95%, is that female players don't like playing practice sets. It's just the worst experience. Find ways to get them to feel safe to compete. Most of the time, for me, it was the girls were so worried about what they were going to have to tell their parents about the results of their matches. They also don't like playing their friends. Guys are more competitive like that. They just want to go and play matches. They don't want to work on technique. So there's some of the adjustments you have to do as a coach. It's a case by case thing. But the guys that I've coached, they're like, oh, I'm so bored. Can we just play a set? But then they'll never improve their parts of their game. And then the girls will be like, oh, can we just do baskets? And so for me, the differences are those two. Boys want to get to know you as a person, but if they don't really like you, they'll probably, they're taught to suck it up. They have to be tough. This is the thing. And for girls, well, you're allowed to be a little bit more emotional. So get to know your players. That's the most important thing. And there's going to be people on either side, but typically those are the two main differences between that. And also be super mindful of your language when you're working with female players, because the sarcasm and the saying women's tennis is rubbish or none of the girls on the WTA tour can serve, it's just degrading. It'd be empowering to your female students. Don't talk about weight, body image. Don't be joking about people looking fat. The societal pressure on women to fit this ideal or this norm is huge. And you have to understand that this is the world that we live in. We can't just go, oh, well, we don't think like that and it shouldn't be that way. Well, it is this way. So you have to act accordingly. So be ultra mindful of your language in that space. I visited 3 different friends in hospital wards with anorexia when I was young. And so if I know 3 people, just think how many are out there. 33% of female athletes have some form of eating disorder. And that can be as simple as saying, how have you put on so much weight? How did you let yourself go? I think you need to be a little thinner. Women need to start their period 22% body fat to start it. So they are going to look like they put on body fat. This is just norm. So you have to be aware of these things when you're coaching. It's critical.
Yeah. And also probably being aware to call out if there is those kind of negative comments coming from other players as well, that you're not allowing that space to develop. But I wanted to touch back on, you mentioned that whole idea of, and I've noticed this as well from my own experience and playing and coaching, how to keep it competitive and how to, because I think I've always found when you play practice sets with teenage guys, they're very easy to almost argue and call each other out and, be almost saying, come on the court in a practice session. But then they're fine and they're chatting afterwards. Whereas sometimes I found with girls is they feel like they're almost, that's not to be expected of them, to be competitive and to kind of, play as if they're playing a match. And I think for me, I found the best progression has always been if you practice as you mean to play. So if you're getting those competitive sets and you're getting those competitive matches, not in a competition or a structured tournament. So has there been anything that you found that is helpful, or so for any of the coaches on the line, do you have any kind of words of advice you would give them to kind of develop that competitive, but also not developing that, for want of a better word, negative atmosphere on the court, but keeping it competitive as well?
Well, from your experience with teams of girls, it can be hard. And I think very important to keep your eye out for kind of cliques within groups. Peer pressure, yes, but more little snippy snide remarks. You need to just cut it, right? If you see any sort of this kind of chitty chatty in one corner with 2 girls, any sort of ganging up or ostracizing a certain athlete or these kinds of things, you got to get straight on top of it. I had a couple kids. One liked this boy, the friend of the other one liked that boy, and then that one did. I just talked to them directly. The parents did a horrendous job of trying to deal with it. They actually made it worse.
Oh no.
I'm not saying get involved in their private life, but you need to see those things before they become big things. And with the competitive side, it's hard. I think you just kind of navigate. You've got to get to read them emotionally. This is emotional intelligence. If they can't cope with playing that girl today, it's not going to do them any benefit to tell them, well, they're going to learn. They're not going to learn. they're not going to come back and they'll go and do something else. So you'll have some people that are very competitive, and it's less than the guys, but you've got to figure out ways to draw that out, create fun, create, you know, if one girl really struggles with match play, I would always tell the kids, you two are going to know the score. I don't want to know the score. It was always like that. Go over there and play a set. Then I knew that there were some kids, if two of them were fine with me knowing the score and they wanted to tell me, I could know. But if one doesn't and the other one does, just stay out of it. It's difficult, and just let them get used to just competing in a safe space. It's a lot to do with the score. I'm telling you, it's always to do with the score. I think it's less to do with wanting to beat their friends. I think it's feelings of feeling not good enough and things like that. Certain people don't want to play their friends. I don't know any of my friends that didn't want to beat their friends. I don't know. I think that's something that we just throw out in the wind. But it's a lot to do with that, with being perfectionists.
Yes, yeah.
Feeling like a failure. Perfectionism comes from so much pressure in society to be perfect, and it's instilled in us from day dot. So work with it and just create as safe a space as you can for them to compete, and then you'll create some competitors.
Yeah, I think as well, like you said, like putting the onus on them and letting them to keep the score, like even maybe creating some almost like a team tournament format within a coaching session. Like we've done that before.
They love that. Girls love that.
Yeah, you pick a leader and then you have, you know, two teams. So then it's more of like a team atmosphere, but competitive rather than that individualized. Oh, did Sarah beat Grania, or did Grania beat Sarah? What was the score?
Grania beat Sarah easy. Probably.
I don't know about that now, but no, that's super. I don't think I'm conscious that
someone has to have a question, crew.
I know,
There's 26 of you. One of you's got to have something. I will tell you that I was named, this is my Irish fact, I was named after my great grandmother, whose name was Sarah. She came over on the boat from Ireland.
No way.
Yes, yes. I love to sing. I think I have the Irish blood in my voice. And two of my housemates in Sydney are Irish. I was saying before we got on, everyone, I spent some time in Limerick. It's such a beautiful country, and you're very lucky to be from an amazing place. And I wish you had some questions for me, but if you don't have any questions, we'll try to do something together live. I think that's a great way to work together. And if anyone has any other questions that they don't want to ask in this space, reach out to me anytime, Sarah with an H at WTCAtennis.org. I'm happy to answer any of your questions and support however I can, because you guys are a little bit of my blood, so we're a team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll have to do something, obviously, when we get back to that new normal and lockdowns are lifted and everyone's kind of back into the swing of things. But I really just first off want to say massive thank you to you, Sarah, for coming on today. I think it's been a really interesting discussion. I hope everyone, I think we have a question coming in. I hope everyone.
There's a shout out to my main man, Baz.
Oh, yeah.
I love Barry Clark. Yeah, say hi to Ian for me. Those guys have come to a couple of conferences. We're going to keep working together. It's absolutely my pleasure. I love talking about this and look forward to helping you grow what you're doing. Congratulations on the initiatives, and I wish everyone the best of success with the next steps.
No, that's super, Sarah. Thank you so much. I just want to again thank you and just say it was a really, really interesting discussion. I do want to follow up. There will be. Oh, we do actually have.
We got a question.
We've got one question. All right.
Legendary.
So what was from an anonymous? What was the most challenging thing for you progressing in your coaching path? How did you deal with it? So was there any specific time?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Very good question.
There were a lot, actually. I mean, there's no straightforward path. It just doesn't work like that. You have to understand that there's ups and downs, and I want to actually read you a quote that's going to pop on my screen in a second. That's something that I think is a pretty good takeaway. I sent this to one of my best friends the other day, and it says, where is it? Oh, don't tell me. Here it is. Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light.
Oh, wow. That's powerful.
And for me, there's been a lot of ups and downs. There's mistakes that I've made on my coaching journey. There's ways that maybe I didn't handle things that well when I was a younger coach and didn't have a lot of experience. I don't think that we ever have to be apologetic for mistakes that we've made, but I think that's part of our story and it's part of our growth. One of the things that was quite difficult for me to listen to when I was younger and thought, I would say I was probably 23 at the time I was, Gigi, she would just get into me about that I can't wear my flip-flops and my board shorts to the courts. And I just didn't understand it. I was a nonconformist to play by my own rules, like maverick really. And I just, the way that she delivered it, probably I couldn't hear it, but I probably couldn't hear that much when I was that age. And I thought it was ridiculous. I said, if I'm a good coach, it makes no difference. I used to ride my longboard, skateboard around at Indian Wells. And now looking back, maybe if I had some other mentors and people explain the importance of professionalism in the way that you're perceived, it would have helped me. And then actually another guy, Stefan Edith Vank, he was the head of Dutch tennis for a long time. He's a great guy. He said it to me in a way where he said, you're a great coach, but you've just got to, like, you can't wear your board shorts because you want people to really respect you for your knowledge, and otherwise that's what they're going to think. And I will say that was a thing that was really helpful. It was hard for me to listen to. I think sometimes I just learned over time to manage frustrations and to make sure that I would be as much of a positive coach as I could possibly be. But that's a standout thing for me. And that was a hard thing to listen to. And
yeah, absolutely.
And I listened to it, and that's the only thing I can really tell you. I mean, hey, maybe I got some other stories, but they're for a rainy day. They're for a rainy day in Limerick or Dublin and an Irish folk festival.
Brilliant. We're after
we got another question. Do you want me to answer it?
Yeah, we have two that are actually quite similar. So I'm going to ask, so I'm just going to try and summarize. I hope I've summarized it correctly. But I think both coaches are asking for advice to get players playing competitively in match play, and how do you encourage them to enter into match play if they might feel like they're not quite there yet, or they don't want to, they haven't taken tennis so seriously. It's been more of a social sport for them. How do you encourage them to get involved in competitive play and kind of positively encourage them rather than telling them what to do?
I think it starts with your private lessons or your group lessons to make them believe that they can do it. Competing is a very vulnerable space, and as humans, we're not really encouraged to step into vulnerability very well. And basically, I'm a big, massive fan of Brené Brown. I think she walks on water. She's incredible. Listen to her as much as you possibly can. Vulnerability is having the courage to show up even when you can't control the outcomes. That's not that easy for people who are apprehensive about competing. What we can do is encourage them and make them realize that they're valued and you appreciate them beyond what any of the results will be. And if you can create a safe way for them to compete, I keep saying it, but it comes back to that over and over. You have to build trusting relationships where the person is able to go into that unknown and be okay with whatever happens, and just throwing them in. If they have to start in doubles, sure, they have to start in doubles. I don't particularly think that a lot of competitive drive comes out of just letting girls play doubles all the time. It's fun, but a lot of the time girls want to play doubles because that they can cope. Yeah. And so let's find other ways of figuring out how they can cope. Let's build them up as individuals. Let's start with small things. Let's talk about why, what things might be scary about competing. talk about it out loud, and then you might be able to move through the process. But nothing is more important than creating a safe relationship and space for them to feel like it's okay for them to, whatever happens.
Yeah, absolutely. We have one more question, and I'm sorry, we're going to end it on this one because I'm conscious we have to be done within the next few minutes. So the last question here is from Emer, and it says, on the women's tour, who would you feel has the best technique and someone we could tell the kids to watch? So kind of what you talked about, not saying, oh, we should be like, you know, Rafa's backhand or Roger Federer's serve. Is there any standout WTA player that you would recommend?
Yeah, I would say I would look a lot at Serena's first serve. I think it's amazing. I would look at Petra Martic has an amazing serve. Petra Martic has an amazing slice backhand. I would dare say that probably for the chest side forehand, the more athletic style, I would look at Ash Barty. For someone with a longer swing on the forehand, I would look at Sloane Stephens or Madison Keys. I would say Madison Keys has a great one. I think they're probably the go-to players. Halep is an unbelievable mover. She has a great backhand as well. I would look at probably Barty, Martic, and Serena for the serve, and probably Barty for the second serve. Yeah, and any of the great movers. But look for someone that looks like them, that plays like them, that's their same size and their same stature.
Same build, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not an advocate for everybody having that chest side forehand. I think longer swings on the forehand, it purely depends on the player. Just work with what works for them. And email me any other questions because I know we're going to get the boot.
Yeah, no, super. I just quickly wanted to finish up with thanking everyone for joining us today. Thanking Sarah again for a fantastic chat. And just to finish up, there is, like always, my wonderful exit surveys that I always like doing. So I just appreciate if anyone could fill those out as soon as we leave this webinar. But just to thank you again for joining us so early, and hope you have a lovely day.
All right, I'm off to dinner, Grania. Have a great day, and thanks for all that you do.
You too. Bye.
See you guys. Bye.